Marin County is a very active community, which includes many people on bikes. So let's talk about common bike injuries and treatment and what bike riders can do to protect themselves with Dr. Edward Alfrey, Trauma Medical Director at MarinHealth Medical Center and a General Surgeon at MarinHealth General and Colorectal Surgery, a UCSF health clinic. This is the Healing Podcast from Marin Health. I'm Bill Klaproth. Dr. Alfrey, thank you so much for your time. So first off, can you share some quick background on yourself?
I originally started out in the city and county of Denver working as a paramedic before going to medical school. And then I went to medical school at the University of Colorado and trained in surgery at the University of Arizona and then the University of Pennsylvania in transplant. But for most of my career, I've been involved in trauma services. And in 2011, I came to MarinHealth Medical Center to run the trauma services.
You've been around, and we're happy to have you here in Marin. So Marin County, as you know, is a very active community. So let's talk about biking and bike safety. Do you see a lot of bike accidents in the emergency department?
We do. If you just look at all trauma centers around the country, we see about 6 times the number of bicycle accidents per trauma patients as other centers. And that may be because of the weather. It's a sort of a year-round sport here. It's very popular in Marin County. And also we have a lot of visitors from San Francisco that ride across the Golden Gate Bridge and then enter Marin County after crossing the Golden Gate Bridge. Part of the problem with those riders is I think they fail to realize the deep and rapid descent that comes after you cross the Golden Gate Bridge, and we sometimes see patients from those bicycle crashes going way too fast because they've lost control of their bicycle after they cross into Marin County from the city across the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yes, I love that ride, by the way. It is gorgeous and beautiful, and I know what you're talking about. So speaking of bikes and injuries, what types of injuries then do you usually see from bikers, and can they be serious?
Yes, the injuries from bicycle crashes run the gamut from having abrasions on their legs. The most common injuries, quite frankly, are patients will have a couple of rib fractures, a clavicle fracture, which is the collarbone, and a concussion. Concussions actually are a leading injury that we see after bicycle crashes.
What does treatment and recovery typically look like for those types of injuries?
Usually we see a concussion plus other injuries, which include some rib fractures and maybe a broken clavicle. Those type of recoveries can take anywhere from a few days to recover to several weeks because, again, concussion, I know there's been a lot of media attention directed to concussions recently because of the NFL and other type of contact sports. And that's what we see is injuries that can range from just having some headaches and photophobia for a few days to where it takes several weeks to recover because of the loss of ability to focus and that sort of thing. And then regarding the rib fractures, pain from a rib fracture can usually be pretty serious for up to 3 or 4 weeks. If you have an associated collapsed lung as well, then that extends the recovery even a bit more.
And speaking of concussions, what role do helmets play in protecting people from concussions?
It turns out that a helmet doesn't prevent a concussion. What the helmet does is it prevents serious head injuries. So the percentage of patients with serious head injuries after bicycle crashes is significantly improved. You're 4 times more likely to have a skull fracture if you're not wearing a helmet, and you're about 4 times more likely to have a major head injury if you're not wearing a helmet. So the helmets do prevent serious injury. They just don't really prevent a concussion.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I'm glad you explained that to us. And then speaking of biker safety, what else can bike riders do to protect themselves?
Well, the first thing they can do is they can know their geography. They can recognize the terrain, of course, because things like gravel cause injuries. They should understand the bicycle that they're riding, and they should be careful because not all bicycle crashes into cars are a fault of the car. Frequently we find it the bicyclist that's not riding in the lane properly or is riding too fast or decides to not stop for a stop sign. I think sometimes bicyclists fail to realize that stop signs mean anybody that's moving, not just a car. And so sometimes we see an innocent driver running into a bicyclist because a bicyclist shoots through a stop sign or a light.
And then if a biker does have a fall, is it necessary to get treated right away?
Because there's so many of these patients have concussions and other injuries, we think it's very important to at least be evaluated if there's any sort of significant impact. That doesn't mean if you're riding along and you stop and grab your water bottle and fall over that you should come into the emergency department. But we do see some patients that come in several hours after a bicycle crash that have serious injuries, and they get home and then their family notice that they're slurred speech or they're not breathing very well, and they bring them in. I can't really comment on everybody that crashes in a bicycle, but if there's any question at all, the safest thing to do is to come in and be evaluated and just make sure that there's not any serious injury, because sometimes, for example, a collapsed lung is not apparent initially on any symptoms. In other words, patients feel like they're breathing fine. They might have a little pain in their chest from a rib fracture, but the collapsed lung can expand relatively quickly, and if they're at home sleeping and their lung collapses even further, they can be in trouble pretty quickly. So we do feel it's important, if there's any question at all, to just come in and be evaluated and make sure that there's not anything more serious going on.
So when in doubt, check it out. And then lastly, Dr. Alfrey, any other thing you'd like to address when it comes to biking and bike safety?
I firmly believe that bicycling is a very good form of exercise. But I think also in knowing that, like any other form of transportation, it's very important to understand the roads you're riding, to be familiar with your bicycle, to make sure that you check it out just like you would your car. If the tire looks low, you should put air in it. Make sure the brakes work properly. Understand that the front brake is not the right brake to pull if you're going downhill really, really fast. And so I think that bicycling is so much part of our lifestyle that we just walk out in the garage, jump on our bike, and off we go. But make sure it's safe, it's tuned up, that the brakes are working, that the tires are filled properly, and know where you're riding.
Some really good points, Dr. Alfrey. Obviously, check your bike out. I know I don't do that, but I'm going to start doing that after you mention that. And earlier you said know your geography as well, which I think is a great point. And thank you for sharing that information with us. And thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thanks again.
You bet. Thanks for having us on.
That's Dr. Edward Alfrey, and for more information, please visit mymarinhealth.org. That's mymarinhealth.org. And if you found this podcast helpful, please share it on your social channels and check out the full podcast library for topics of interest to you. This is the Healing Podcast, brought to you by Marin Health. I'm Bill Klaproth. Thanks for listening.